When you're a very accomplished documentary filmmaker, what does it take to cross over into making narrative feature films? I think Ondi Timoner has the answer. Welcome to the Film Threat Podcast. I am Chris Gore. Hope you're having a good day today. This is my favorite part of the day, is just interviewing and talking to independent filmmakers and discussing their work. If you are not familiar with Ondi Timoner, she is an incredibly accomplished documentary filmmaker. And I say this to people often. They ask me what's my favorite music documentary of all time, and that is a movie called Dig. If you have not seen that film, Ondi spent, better part of 10 years working on that movie. I should probably ask her. I'm sure she has the answer to that question. Dig is an epic music documentary. It's beyond a music documentary. It's so incredible. She also made another documentary film you might be familiar with called We Live in Public, which is, I think, more relevant now than ever before. And Ondi Timoner has a new film called Maplethorpe, the director's cut. It is a narrative feature film about the artist Robert Mapplethorpe, played by Matt Smith in the film. Ondi Timoner, welcome to the Film Threat Podcast. With that introduction, you got to come on the show.
Thank you, Chris.
Well, thanks for being on. Seriously, what does it take to? First of all, let me talk about this movie, Maplethorpe, the director's cut, for a second. Matt Smith, incredible in this film. And it's a biopic. I didn't know anything about Robert Mapplethorpe and his life and his journey. He was closeted gay, just found himself, and he's sort of in the act of finding himself, found his work and his voice. It's parts of it very graphic. I mean that in the best way. And it's also stylistically, it's set in the 60s and 70s. And I love the way you shot it. It's beautiful. It feels like you can, I don't know if you shot on film, but you can feel the film grain.
Definitely shot on film, all on film. It's super 16 millimeter and Super 8. Yeah.
It looks incredible. And I think it also, what that does so well is it evokes the era. Tell me what went into this and how you made that leap from documentary filmmaker to narrative filmmaker. And I will say this, that from my observation is it's storytelling, right? I mean, storytelling is you are a great storyteller. Thanks. And transferring that to a narrative feature had to present some challenges. What were some of those challenges, and how did you make that leap?
So, it's funny. There are a lot of really great parallels between doc filmmaking and scripted filmmaking, as I call it, with actors. Really getting your subjects to feel comfortable and getting your actors to feel comfortable to perform, to play, to improvise. Very similar. People come into an interview when you're a filmmaker, or there's a camera there in the scene and it might affect the action. And the idea is to have all that disappear. It's very similar, but it's even more challenging when you have 30 to 50 people to have disappear, or there's, things swinging around on set and you just want Matt to be, there. And obviously he's a pro. He's incredible. Casting Matt Smith was, a very good move. And we did that well before The Crown, because he was just, his read, and back when he would read, he read for it, was just, it was shockingly perfect. He had this mercurial tension to him, and a gravitas that Robert Mapplethorpe had. He was a very quiet, powerful, dark prince, if you will, of an artist. And he was driven to make his art to really keep any kind of balance in the world and in his life. He also was driven to make his art because he wanted all of us to see the beauty that he saw in an underworld at that point. LGBTQ culture and BDSM culture were not things that we even talked about. They were unthinkable, unspeakable, and obscene. And he wanted to show that they were sculpturally as beautiful as a Rodin or a Michelangelo. So his mission was very intense, and I really wanted to bring that home, and Matt Smith really brought that home. But as a doc filmmaker, I've always thought that real life is more fascinating than anything we can make up. So, you refer to Dig or We Live in Public. These films are shot over many, many years so that I can really recreate the serendipity of life and take everyone on that adventure and really kind of connect the dots. And you just are, like in all of our lives, as things are happening, we really don't have any idea what's going to come next. But if we look back, we can say, oh my gosh, that thing led to that, led to that. And it was similar, process in writing the script for Maplethorpe. I really saw it as a coming of age and coming into his art and coming into his sexuality kind of woven together. And that's why it was very important to me to bring him alive in a scripted film instead of making a documentary, because Maplethorpe is no longer with us because he died of AIDS in 1989. So to me, I couldn't make a documentary that would bring him alive. Every documentary I've made to date is the people are alive. So that was kind of the impetus for making it a scripted film. But I've always developed scripted films and very much been at the altar a few times ever since Dig. Producers and companies in Hollywood have asked me to direct scripted films because of this narrative quality of Dig. And so I've come very close, actually. And for reasons, there's so many reasons that films don't get made, but for very strange reasons that could be a whole separate interview, Chris, they haven't happened. But this one was 12 years in the making and then, shot in 19 days. And the journey from 2006 to when I shot it in 2017 is quite a tale. But Sundance played a big role. They had me at the Labs in 2010 after I won the festival the second time for We Live in Public. And that was very formative. And that's when I took over the writing of the film, and I wrote about 58 drafts over those 12 years. But then when it came down to shooting, we had to shoot it in 19 days. And so that's very different. In a documentary, I would have shot for those 12 years and then edited for 4 or 5 probably over that time. But instead I had, 19 days to shoot my script and then 10 weeks to edit the director's cut. So very different.
Well, it's also interesting. Just I think that your service time you spent in the doc world actually served you well, because there is a groundedness and a reality, a tone that really, really is effective with this doc. I mean, you are drawn in from the beginning. And I just feel I think it's your style and tone and how you chose to approach it. And additionally, Matt Smith, his approach too. Can you talk about your collaboration and how you work together to just have it, have this grounded in reality feel?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, we didn't rehearse very much. We did a reading with the whole cast, and I then broke out into separate meetings and kind of lunches and even a field trip. I took Matt and Marianne Rendon, who played Patti Smith, to the location where we would be shooting a lot of scenes. I mean, when you're shooting a movie like this, that's as ambitious as 4 decades, 60s, 70s, 80s, 50s as a child, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And you're shooting on film and you have such a limited amount of time. It's all about multi-use locations. Although we ended up shooting in, I think, 30 to 35 locations. But one of them was very, very important because the Chelsea Hotel, where they were young loves and really discovered their artistry, had closed. And I actually knew that it was going to close. And because I've been developing the film for so long, I checked in and did like a sleepover location scout and just shot the heck out of it with my phone. And one thing I noticed about the Chelsea Hotel was the stairwell. So our brilliant production designer, Jonah Markowitz, was charged with the mission of finding a stairwell that could second as the Chelsea Hotel and could be a believable location to an iconic location like that. And we found that in Yonkers, of all places. And we found it in a building that was actually we could use for his dorm room, for Drummer Magazine, for the gazebo where he's doing the fashion shoot where his brother leaves him, for the first Brooklyn apartment where he takes Patty to the S&M club in this we shot in an abandoned pool, and their apartment at the Chelsea Hotel, as well as the lobby. So, but what was really interesting is just because I made Dig and I get all kinds of crazy invitations from musicians all the time. As a result, I have perennial love for musicians for Dig. I was invited to this like all night party at the location where we were going to be shooting. So I thought, let me get Matt and Marianne in costume to some extent. Let's bring them by the hairstylist's place. They can meet her. They can start to play with their hair. And then let's all go to this place and have a good time. And so that was kind of the way I did it. Like, they had a wonderful time. And actually, you'll see in the director's cut Super 8 footage of them laughing with the sun setting behind them and them playing like thumb war. That was, sorry, phone. Hold on, let me just get it and hang it up. Okay. So that was actually me just shooting Super 8 film. I'll start that part again in case you want to edit it. So
it's fine. It's fine. I was curious about the Super 8. I mean, the movie looks so beautiful. I mean, you would expect that a movie about a photographer would be beautifully photographed. And so I want to learn more about like what your approach was. You mentioned it was 19 days, but it was a decade in the making to get to that place. So you certainly thought about it.
I mean, I want to make sure to answer your question about Matt, but I just want to say, like, we did shoot. I just brought a Super 8 camera and shot footage of them at that party that ended up making it into the cut. And then I ended up carrying that Super 8 camera and having it on my director's chair every day and shooting bridges and buildings on the way to work, on the way to set, filming the actors when Nancy Schreiber, our incredible DP, was setting up and changing lights over. We had so little time, but the actors also were waiting around. And so I grabbed them and brought them outside and shot Super 8. Or, you'll see Super 8 of Matt lying in the bed, after he's done, turned a trick and he's got money on his chest. That's just, him lying there kind of frustrated that he can't keep acting. And so I would shoot Super 8. And that was kind of the peanut butter for the bread, if you will. I just knew we wouldn't have enough time to capture the entire script and that we needed some of those more authentic moments that also felt like endemic to the period and to the story. But Matt himself liked to keep it fresh. He liked to improvise a lot. He liked to give me something different on every take. And sometimes because of the schedule, we didn't have more than, actually one or two takes sometimes. But sometimes we would make a meal out of it. Like the scene where, at the beginning of the 80s, when it jumps 10 years to the 80s and suddenly he's alone. He's successful, but he's alone. And you'll notice the color temperature changes. I went from like much warmer hues in the 70s when he's with Sam and with Patty before that to a much bluer, grayer palette. And Matt really worked that. In the script, it's 2 lines of dialogue. It's like he's trying to call Patty and he's saying, "I won't ruin your perfect life." And he hangs up the phone and does a line of cocaine. But in the film, he gets up and charges across and jumps into the windowsill and looks down. And it's just so beautiful, the movement of that, that we spent hours on it. And then that meant that we had to kind of block shoot other things. So when Matt felt that inspiration, I would try to let him go with that. Or if he and I together felt that, we would change other aspects of the shoot to compensate for that. But the main thing was that Matt needed to understand every piece of dialogue I had written. And he's a real intellectual. He's just like Maplethorpe in a lot of ways. He's like, I remember meeting with him at Tribeca and saying goodbye. And when he stood up, the coffee stirrer had been broken up into like a pile of, pieces just from just talking to me and breaking it up. He had like a nervous energy and he was always amped and ready to go. So when he wanted to talk about the dialogue or why I had written a certain thing, we would just go off. And as long as it took, and sometimes it was frustrating because it was on a shoot day, but we would have that debate, and it would be a healthy debate. And I would just eventually try to get to, let's do it this way, and let's do it the way I wrote it, and let's do it this way, and here's why. And it was kind of awesome because we understood, he would then understand the motivation of the character. And so it was a meeting of the minds. And I really do feel, and I don't know if you've seen my film Brand, A Second Coming, about Russell Brand, but my greatest preparation was dealing with another Brit, Russell Brand, and needing to really justify and kind of go toe to toe intellectually to justify everything I was asking, and to kind of show him that I could meet him on that level. That was kind of what I needed to do with Matt. And then once we did that, we were in sync, and he felt really comfortable. So
I have not seen Brand. I mean, not now. Clearly, I need to, but
yeah, that's a good one. That's fun.
Now, but Matt Smith, I mean, he's. I hate to point this out. He's a Time Lord. He was Doctor Who. Did you ever talk about Doctor Who with him at all? Or like,
that's a great story, Chris, that I have to tell you.
You got to tell me that.
I cast Matt Smith because he was Doctor Who, and yet that would be the last reason I would cast him for this role, because the character is so different. But it's because of my son Joachim Timoner, who is my only child, was obsessed with Doctor Who. And so he was 9 at the time, and he said, "Mama, I think you should marry Matt Smith." And I said, I think that's geographically undesirable. I don't think it's going to work. There's a little bit of an age difference. I just don't think it's going to work out, Jukes. Comes back to me like a week later, and he's like, "Mama, I have an idea. Matt Smith should play Robert Mapplethorpe." And I said, "Okay, well, that's interesting." I just love that he was thinking like, so, like he was just going to cast him. I said, "That's great." I thought, no way, no way. Is that totally different character? And then a week after that, his agents called. It's super ironic and serendipitous, and said, "Matt Smith would love to meet with you about Robert Mapplethorpe." And I thought, I would normally totally not entertain this, but my son, just brought this up. Like, I guess I should go. This is strange timing. So I went to lunch with him, and actually brought Juki along, because it's rare that you can have a perk that you can share when you're working this hard as a filmmaker with your son. And brought Juki, and Juki and him hit it off. They're still friends to this day. But the person I met at that restaurant was so different than the Doctor Who character. And I don't know if it was Matt just being a really skillful auditioner, but I walked in, and he was kind of like drawing on the table, and he was in this plain white t-shirt, and his hair flopped over, and he was just this troubled artist from the second I walked in. And that's when we had a great lunch, and then I asked him to read. So it is actually Doctor Who that led to that. And there's a picture of him, signed picture of him as Doctor Who in my son's room. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Ondi, it's always a pleasure to chat with you. We should definitely do this. We definitely should do this again. Mapplethorpe, the director's cut, is out and available on video on demand and all platforms. Just want to make sure.
It is. I believe it is. I mean, I haven't checked all platforms, but I know that it's on Hulu, and I believe it's on iTunes and Amazon. But you kind of have to make sure you find the director's cut. Like, if you search Mapplethorpe on Hulu, you're going to get 2 cuts. And what's important to understand is the director's cut's the original cut. It's the official cut that came out is an edited version of the director's cut. So that was out for a couple of years before the director's cut. And the director's cut's getting really great reviews and reception because it's a more complete version. It's actually the version that I intended to make. There's, the Catholic Church and the impact of the church on Maplethorpe is a massive, massive part of his life story. He was an altar boy, and he grew up in the church. And then, of course, when he realized he was gay, and there were 2 heartbreaks, right? He was going to have to leave his life partner, Patti Smith, who he thought would be his partner forever. And, obviously that wasn't going to work out. And then also his father and his family and the church were going to think that he was going to hell and that he'd made a deal with the devil. And he himself even struggled with that idea. So the contrast that you see in the film, whether it's the lighting from one side of his face or the silhouette shots, or, it's his own personality framing everything perfectly, and, and having such trouble with his relationships outside of that, a lot of that is his inner turmoil is coming from his relationship with the church, which is what is really important to find and discover in the director's cut, as well as a ton of the Super 8 footage, all the visual effects, even the death is very different. If you are a filmmaker watching this kind of a budding filmmaker, it would be a cool exercise, I think, to watch both versions. So I stand by both. I love them. But the nonlinear full version is obviously my preference. Hence, it's called the director's cut. So,
well, I never saw the original, and the director's cut.
You may as well. Check it out. Let me know. Write me privately. I'd love to hear what you think.
Awesome. Well, Ondi, thank you so much for talking to us on the Film Threat podcast. Congratulations again. I always just from your first film, just always paid attention to what you're doing because it's always produces something remarkable and new. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And I remember the last movie we just covered was Coming Clean.
True.
Which, just came out. So thank you for your coverage of that as well. I look forward to talking to you again soon.
See ya.
Okay. Bye.